If superiors do not have confidence on the competency of their subordinates, they may not seek their advice or opinions. Whenever there is participation and involvement of the subordinates, it will help the superior to gain their acceptance regarding the policies and procedures or any changes to be made in the organization. First, the person who is conveying this information, he should be properly clear about what is the message he has to convey. Hello everyone, I am Purnima, faculty in the Department of Commerce, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence. In continuation of my sessions on this chapter directing, in this session 8, I will be discussing about the personal barriers to communication and what are the various ways to improve the communication. Let us understand the meaning of the word personal barriers. The personal factors of both sender and receiver may exert influence on the effective communication. Now, we should understand that the personal relationship between the sender and the receiver will have an effect on the communication which is being conveyed. Now, let us look into what are the various types of personal barriers. In this, the first one is fear of challenge to authority. So, if a superior perceives that a particular communication may adversely affect his authority, he or she may withhold or suppress such communication. Now, for example, if the superior receives any mail that his increment is being withheld by the superiors, then such communication he may not want to share it with his subordinates, or those information which he feels that it will have an adverse effect on his authority over the subordinate, he may not want to share it with his subordinates. So, this sort of withholding of information from his subordinates, we call it as personal barrier. Now, the second personal barrier is lack of confidence of superior on his subordinates. Now, what is this lack of confidence? If superiors do not have confidence on the competency of the subordinates, they may not seek their advice or opinions. So, when there is lack of confidence in the subordinates on their advice or their suggestions, if the superior feels that they are not competent enough to give suggestions, then he may not want to disclose such information to his subordinates. Now, the third type of personal barrier is unwillingness to communicate. Now, what is this unwillingness to communicate? Sometimes subordinates may not be prepared to communicate with their superiors if they perceive that it may adversely affect their interest. So, sometimes if the boss is very strict or if he is a very reserved person, then the subordinates may not want to share their problems with him. They may feel that the boss may remove them from the work, or the boss may create problems for him in his career. So, they may not want to share their problems or any complaints with their boss, and this will create a personal barrier in the organization. Now, the next kind of personal barrier is lack of proper incentives. If there is no motivation or incentive for communication, subordinates may not take initiative to communicate. So, if there are no proper incentives, that means, so all information should freely flow from the topmost level to the lowest levels of the organization. And if there is no incentive for communication, then the subordinates may not take the initiative to communicate. So, this may create a personal barrier to communication. Now, after listening to all these barriers to communication, let us look into what are the various ways of improving communication. Now, the first one, let us see what are the various ways here. So, organizations keen on developing effective communication should adopt suitable measures to overcome barriers and improve communication effectiveness. So, to have a proper and effective communication channels in an organization, there are certain steps which should be followed by almost all the organizations, and we should understand that a free flow of communication is necessary for the proper working of an organization. So, let us see what are the various steps which every organization should take in order to have effective communication. In this, the first step is clarify the ideas before communication. The problem to be communicated to the subordinates should be clear and in all its perspective to the executive himself. So whenever there is any problem to be communicated to the subordinate or any information which has to be conveyed to the subordinate, first the person who is conveying this information, he should be properly clear about what is the message he has to convey. Only after clarifying himself with the intended message, he has to convey it to his subordinate. Then the next type of improving the communication effectiveness is communicate according to the needs of the receiver. Now let us understand what do you mean by needs of the receiver. The manager should adjust his communication according to the education and understanding levels of the subordinates. So here we have the superior and here we have the subordinate. Now when you are communicating to the subordinate, it should be in a language which the subordinate understands. Now if you are using lot of technical jargons in your message, then it may not be properly conveyed to the subordinate and he may not understand the message. So it is usually the responsibility of the manager to see that whatever he is conveying, it will be understood by his subordinates in which the language which they understand. Now the third step in improving communication effectiveness is consult others before communicating. So here you can see these persons are having a consultation. So they are consulting with each other. Now what they are consulting? Let us see. Participation and involvement of subordinates may help to gain ready acceptance and willing cooperation of subordinates. So whenever a policy decision is being taken in the organization, it is necessary for other subordinates to take part in it. So there should be proper participation of the subordinates in all important meetings of the organization. So whenever there is participation and involvement of the subordinates, it will help the superior to gain their acceptance regarding the policies and procedures or any changes to be made in the organization. So whenever we take suggestions from the employees, they feel happy, they feel that they belong to the organization and as such they will cooperate with the management. So before we communicate anything, we have to make consultation with the subordinate and then we can communicate. Then the next step in improving communication is convey things of help and value to listeners. So while conveying message to others, it is better to know the interest and needs of the people with whom you are communicating. So we should understand what is the interest of the receiver. So if that person is not interested, for example, you are conveying some information about cricket or you are conveying some information about political news or you are communicating some information which is of no use to the receiver, then he may not listen. So we should understand that before communicating, we look into what is their interest. If he has any interest in cricket, then you convey information relating to cricket. If that person is interested in political news, then you can give him some political news of which he may have some interest. So in this way, we should see that the communication gets effective. Now, the fourth step in improving communication is ensure proper feedback. The communicator may ensure the success of communication by asking questions regarding the message conveyed. The communication process may be improved by the feedback received to make it more responsible. So the communicator, in order to see that this communication has received all his subordinates, he may ask questions regarding the message which he has conveyed. For example, he has sent an invitation to all his subordinates regarding a function in his house. Now, he may ask questions, venue of the function is close by, or he may ask whether they are all free on that day. So in this way, he can ensure that his invitation invitation has reached all his subordinates. Now, the communication process may be improved by the feedback received to make it more responsible. So based on the feedback which he has received, he can always ensure that the communication has reached all his subordinates. Now, the next step in improving communication effectiveness is follow-up communication. Now, let us see what do you mean by follow-up communication. There should be regular follow-up and review on the instructions given to subordinates. So, whenever you are giving any instructions to the subordinates, you have to ensure that there is proper follow-up. Now, what is follow-up? You have to just ask the subordinates whether they have received the communication. Suppose today you have sent a communication to the subordinates regarding any particular activity to be done, then the subordinates, he should also again ask the question on the next day whether they have received such and such a communication and what steps they have taken regarding that communication. So, when you are following up on the communication, we ensure that the communication has reached everybody in the organization. Then, next one is be a good listener. So, manager should be a good listener. Patient and attentive listening solves half of the problems. So, the 8th step in communication effectiveness is be a good listener. Manager should be a good listener. Patient and attentive listening solves half of the problems. Now, when the manager is a good listener, he will be able to solve the problems of his subordinates. Usually, subordinates come to the manager when they have any problems or when they have any complaint regarding any facility being provided in the organization. So, if the manager is a good listener and he listens patiently to whatever the subordinate is telling, then that patient listening itself will solve most of the problems in the organization. Now, the last step in improving communication effectiveness is communicate for present as well as future. So, generally communication is needed to meet the existing commitments to maintain consistency. The communication should aim at future goals of the enterprise also. So, whenever we are giving any instructions to the subordinates, it is essential for us to see that communication reaches on time to the subordinates. So, whatever instructions are given, it should be given with the proper time frame to see that the subordinates complete the work in time, and there should also be a provision for future course of activities also in this communication. So, in this way, we can take all these steps to just overcome the barriers to communication. So, hope you have all understood what are the personal barriers to communication and what are the various ways in which communication lines can be improved in any organization. Thank you.